There was a time when the world believed it had found the perfect answer to the energy dilemma: not coal with its smoke and pollution, not oil with its endless volatility, and not yet a full bet on solar and wind, which were still seen as unreliable. The answer was LNG, liquefied natural gas. It was praised as a transition fuel, a smooth bridge between the fossil fuel age and the era of clean energy, cleaner than coal, more flexible than pipelines, and transportable across oceans by ship. But every bridge is only as trustworthy as the ground beneath it, and it took just one strike on the world's largest LNG hub in Qatar to shake the entire system. Gas prices surged. Asian nations scrambled for cargoes. Some countries began considering a return to coal. Economies that believed they had purchased energy security suddenly realized they had merely traded one dependency for another. The LNG crisis is not simply a story about war or fuel prices. It is a far larger warning. The world has been building its energy future on foundations far more fragile than it imagined. For years, LNG was seen as the quiet hero of the global energy market. Natural gas is abundant, relatively cheap, and burns far cleaner than coal. Its greatest challenge was never supply, it was transport. Gas traditionally moves through pipelines, meaning consuming nations must either be geographically close to producers or tied into politically complex infrastructure networks. LNG was designed to solve that problem. When natural gas is cooled to around -163 degrees Celsius, it becomes liquid, shrinking to roughly 1/600th of its original volume. That allows enormous amounts of energy to be loaded onto tankers, shipped across oceans, and delivered to countries with the right import terminals. It was an engineering marvel. But more importantly, it was an economic revolution. Countries lacking domestic resources, such as Japan, South Korea, India, and Bangladesh, could import LNG to power grids, heat homes, produce fertilizer, and run industries. Many emerging economies saw LNG as the key to rapid growth without relying entirely on heavily polluting coal. At a time when climate change was becoming central to policy discussions, LNG was marketed as the less bad option. It was not as clean as renewables, but it was cleaner than coal, and that is why it earned the label of a bridge fuel, something to use for a few decades before gradually transitioning to wind, solar, and storage technologies. It sounded reasonable, and the world embraced it. No country benefited from that belief more than Qatar. With vast gas reserves and a strategic location, Qatar built Ras Laffan Industrial City, the largest LNG industrial complex in the world. For decades, it became a symbol of reliability. Thousands of cargoes departed on schedule, supplying Asia and Europe. Long-term contracts worth billions were signed on one nearly unquestioned assumption: Qatari LNG would always be available. That is what made the recent shock so severe. When Ras Laffan was attacked, it was not only infrastructure that was damaged. Market confidence was shattered as well. Export trains were disrupted. A global supply tightened sharply, and repairs could take years. In energy markets, the loss of confidence can be just as dangerous as the loss of production. As soon as Qatar's ability to deliver was called into question, spot LNG prices soared. Import-dependent nations rushed into bidding wars for every available cargo. Wealthier buyers paid more. Poorer countries cut electricity, slowed factories, or faced economic pain. That was when the truth became clear. The global LNG market is not as deep or flexible as many assumed. It functions smoothly when conditions are normal. Under major stress, it seizes up quickly. The core problem is that LNG creates the illusion of security while hiding multiple vulnerabilities. First, the LNG supply chain is extraordinarily complex and expensive. Extraction, liquefaction, shipping, regasification, and distribution all require specialized infrastructure. If one link fails, the entire chain is affected. Second, LNG depends heavily on strategic maritime routes. Much of Qatar's supply must pass through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most sensitive geopolitical flashpoints. If that route is blocked or threatened, millions of tons of fuel can be trapped. Third, LNG markets allocate fuel based on purchasing power. In a crisis, cargoes do not necessarily go where they are needed most, they go where the highest price is offered. That leaves developing nations structurally disadvantaged. In other words, many countries believed they were buying energy. In reality, they were buying dependence. This crisis also weakens another long-held belief, that LNG is a dependable bridge to clean energy. A bridge only matters if it helps you move forward. But if the bridge shakes constantly, becomes unaffordable, and risks collapse, people will search for another route. In the short term, the alternatives can be ugly. Some countries may return to coal because old coal plants still exist. This is the great irony. An LNG crisis could temporarily increase global emissions. But over the long term, this shock may accelerate investment in renewables. And the reason is not only climate, it is national security. The sun does not require tanker ships. Wind does not pass through Hormuz. A domestic solar farm cannot be interrupted by conflict in the Middle East. Wind turbines do not spike in price because of naval tensions. That is an advantage imported fuels struggle to match. For years, our renewables were criticized for intermittency. What if the sun does not shine? What if the wind does not blow? Now the world is beginning to ask the reverse question. What if the ships do not arrive? What if the terminal is attacked? What if supply is cut off? That new question changes everything. Of course, renewable energy is not magic. It requires batteries, smart grids, investment, and time. No nation can replace LNG overnight. But the current crisis is forcing countries to rethink strategy. Instead of relying too heavily on one imported fuel, many may diversify. Solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, storage, and energy efficiency. LNG would remain part of the system, but no longer the main pillar holding it up. That is what resilience looks like. Meanwhile, one country stands to benefit clearly from the disruption: United States. Thanks to the shale revolution, U.S. natural gas output has surged over the past decade. Export capacity has expanded dramatically, making the United States the world's largest LNG exporter. When Qatar struggles, buyers naturally look to the U.S. as a geopolitically safer supplier. New capital may also flow into LNG projects in Canada, Mozambique, and Argentina. Yet, even the United States cannot immediately fill the gap. Building LNG export terminals takes years, costs billions, and depends on permits, financing, and port infrastructure. That means the world may have to live with tighter supply and higher prices for some time. The greatest lesson of this crisis is not about Qatar, nor even about LNG itself. It is about how the world defines energy security. For years, countries judged energy systems by three standards: cheap, clean, and sufficient. Now a fourth standard has returned with force: resilience under crisis. A cheap energy source that can be cut off is not truly cheap. A clean source that depends too heavily on imports is not truly secure. A system optimized on paper may fail when the world turns unstable. The future will belong not simply to nations that find cheaper electricity, but to those that build systems that are more flexible, more diverse, and more self-reliant. LNG was once seen as the bridge of the energy transition era. But this crisis has shown that if a bridge rests on unstable geopolitical ground, it can become a bottleneck instead of a pathway. The world will still need LNG for many years to come, but it will be far harder to see it as the perfect answer. And after every energy crisis, humanity tends to relearn the same lesson: self-reliance is not a luxury, it is a condition of survival.